Welcome, and thanks to everyone for joining us wherever you are and whatever time that it is. I'm Chris Johnstone. I'm Senior Advisor and Japan Chair here at CSIS, and I'm really delighted to be able to convene this virtual event today on the summit meeting last Friday between President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida. What a few weeks it has been for Japan and for the U.S. Japan relationship. This is truly, I think it's fair to say, a period of historic and unprecedented change. On December 16th of last year, Japan unveiled new national security and defense strategies, which together included announcements that shattered policy norms in a number of areas that had been in place for decades. Japan announced plans to increase defense spending and defense-related spending by nearly double to about 2% of GDP by 2027. It also announced plans to acquire a range of new defense capabilities that it has long forsworn, including long-range precision strike cruise missiles, and it laid out plans for investments in a variety of other areas, including space, cyber, uncrewed systems, and other areas. And it signaled an intent to strengthen Japan's defense industry, including through expanded international partnerships. This is on top of an already robust economic security agenda that Prime Minister Kishida and his team have put in place, which aims to strengthen Japan's capacity in a range of high technology sectors, including semiconductors, and to put in place safeguards to protect Japan's technological advantages. Last week was something of a capstone to these events, beginning with a 2+2 meeting of Secretaries of State and Defense and Foreign Ministers Foreign Minister and Defense Minister last week, which featured announcements on a range of initiatives to strengthen the U.S.-Japan defense partnership as well. And then on Friday, Prime Minister Kishida came to the White House, putting an exclamation mark really on all of these events. This was his first trip to Washington as Prime Minister, his first visit to the Oval Office, and it came at a big moment in the relationship. That's quite a month, I must say, one that a few years ago would have seemed pretty unimaginable in this relationship. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by two people who can give us a perspective on the meeting and on the state of the relationship, really like no one else. I'm joined by Dr. Kurt Campbell, Deputy Assistant to the President and Coordinator for the Indo-Pacific on the National Security Council, and Ambassador Tomita Koji, Japan's ambassador to the United States. My sincere welcome to both of you. What I'd like to do is start by inviting each of you to offer your broad assessment of the meeting and of the state of the relationship, and then I'll ask a few questions and intersperse some questions that we've gotten from our audience as well, if that works for both of you. And perhaps, Kurt, just to jump right into it, maybe I'll turn to you for some opening thoughts.
Chris, thank you very much, and very much appreciate the invitation. And I thought your excellent laydown. And I do want to just take a moment, if it's appropriate, to express just a few words of gratitude, just quickly as we get started. First and foremost, for me, I want to thank Ambassador Tomita. I cannot imagine a more steady hand who helped guide both the U.S. side and Japan at such a critical moment. It's always the case that Japan sends their best here. Ambassador Tomita is no exception. And I watched him. These are high wire acts, Chris, and it's great to look back on Monday, but it was challenging and a lot got done. I also think we both recognize that the results of the last few months are based on the tireless work of many people, what we broadly call alliance managers. I just came from lunch, Chris, with Rich Armitage. I wanted to pay my respects and thank him and make clear that what was achieved in the last little while was due in no small part to his role. Chris, one of the reasons I wanted to do this today, it is not lost on any of us that you were at the helm of much of what we were trying to do with Japan over the last 2 decades and more. And so you deserve enormous appreciation for the role that you've played. So I would say most of this work was not accomplished in the last several months. It was a process, a painstaking number of many years, a recognition of quite a stark security environment that Japan is facing in Asia, a recognition that what Japan wanted to do was not only really invest in some independent capabilities, but do that in the context of the U.S. Japan security partnership. I think that was clear and impressive. We can talk more about the event themselves, but I will also say what was important and impressive. I'm very used to Asian leaders coming to us on long flights from the East. What we had with Prime Minister Kishida, something that you did not mention, Chris, but one of the key topics of conversation was his report from Europe, the front lines, with respect to what we are facing with respect to Ukraine. And frankly, he reported that in some of the conversations, it was up to a Japanese leader to buck up a European leader, stay the course, stay firm, stay true. I would say I find that it's almost difficult to imagine Japan playing such a leadership role. And I really was so impressed by what Prime Minister Kishida was able to do, both on this trip throughout Europe, but in the United States. And I would just say simply, Chris, you've done it many times. Ambassador, Tomita has as well. When you're there on the day and there's the pomp and the fire in the fireplace and the warmth between the two leaders, and it goes the way you hoped, it's really quite something. And I have rarely had such a sense of elation about the celebration of the U.S.-Japan relationship. So I'll just stop there.
Great, thank you, Kurt. Ambassador Tomita, any opening thoughts from you on this historic meeting?
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. It's great to see you. Although I'm not still used to seeing you in that capacity. You should still miss negotiating a joint statement until 2:00 in the morning. But anyway, it's great to see you and great to see Kurt. And thank you very much for your compliment. Well, I know steady hand is a euphemism for doing nothing, but still, I think your kind comment touched me, and I like to reciprocate my gratitude to you for arranging such a successful PM's visit. I've been involved in many leaders' meetings between our two countries. But quite frankly, I think this one is one of the most consequential the meetings that I had a privilege of being associated with. The meeting took place at a very critical juncture in national relations. And quite frankly, I think our alliance has never been tested more seriously by the challenges ranging from Ukraine to DPRK. And at this critical juncture, I think it was extremely gratifying to see our two countries showing the closest alignment of policies I've ever witnessed. Just a few days before the leaders meeting, we had a 2+2. And there, I think Anthony Blinken remarked, he's never seen anything like that. I mean, such a close alignment of policy between any two countries. And that's my sentiment exactly. And this alignment exists not just in the area of security policy, but also, economic security, approach to the global South, our strategy to resolve all the global challenges, including climate change. And based on this alignment of policy, both leaders demonstrated unprecedented level of commitment to the task of resolving our common challenges. And, as Kurt mentioned, Prime Minister came after trips to Europe, where he discussed, how he intends to conduct, exercise a responsibility of chairing the G7 process. And also, he came to Washington on the basis of the recent review of national defense policies. And these things, again, underline the kind of commitment the leader brought to this meeting. So that made this meeting very special. And finally, I just like to touch on the personal element. I saw, genuine friendship, genuine rapport, very close communication between the two leaders. And, this personal relationship has been reflected in the hospitality extended by the U.S. side. And, the hospitality bit is very important. I mean, this is an area where usually ambassadors are most concerned about. And there are occasions in the past that I harassed Kurt quite severely. But this time I didn't, harass Kurt as much as I used to. Maybe a little bit, but not too much. But I think this personal trust is very important, because I think in the speech at the CSIS, Prime Minister said that Japanese alliance anchors all his diplomatic efforts. But the personal trust between the leaders anchors our alliance. So we are very fortunate to have this sort of personal trust existing between the two leaders as they take on the challenges ahead, G7, APEC, IPEF, Quad, and so on and so forth. So all in all, it was a splendid summit.
Chris, let me just add one last thing, if I could, just to build on the very good words of Ambassador Tomita. First of all, completely agree. The warmth between the two leaders was clear. I know when the president feels comfortable and when he respects a leader. And the way that is reflected is that he asks that leader a lot of questions. And so he asked the prime minister about Europe, about China, about North Korea. He really was interested to hear his perspective. And Prime Minister Kishida did not disappoint. He was practical, but also at times philosophical. He offered a lot of really good advice, things that we're still studying and take seriously. I will also say it was not only the warmth between the two leaders, but one of the things that, Chris, it's probably not clear, we had our full cabinet really engaging deeply over the last several days, and they were there in the expanded bilateral, and several jumped in on key points on economics. I've rarely seen our Secretary of Defense this passionate about a relationship. I think the ambassador would also agree with that. And so it's strong at the top, but strong throughout the various corridors of power in Washington, D.C. And I think it gives us a lot of confidence to take on the challenges ahead.
That's great. I appreciate that picture of the atmospherics. And I think it underscores the importance of actually being able to meet and conduct diplomacy in person.
Yeah.
Let me pick up, if I could, on, Kurt, you mentioned China. Maybe I'll direct this question first to Ambassador Tomita and then to you, Kurt. So this was the first meeting of the two leaders, I believe, since each of them had their own respective engagements with Xi Jinping at the end of last year. And we're entering what's likely to be a consequential year in the relationship with China for both countries, particularly as we think about entering an election cycle on Taiwan and so forth. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what was the nature of the China discussion in the meeting, and sort of the tone of our efforts to coordinate policy on this critical challenge. Ambassador, could I start with you on the China discussion?
Well, I think as in the case of the leaders meeting in the recent past, I think China was a very important subject, and I think leaders spent some time, talking about discussing for instance, the economic prospect for China, for instance, and also the challenges we face, that certain aspect of Chinese behavior have been very serious concern for our two countries. But at the same time, I think there was a recognition that both of us need to strike a right balance between responding to the challenges posed by China and ensuring the stability in our respective relations with China. And so there was a explanation from both sides what sort of efforts they're taking in this effort of striking right balance. So all in all, the discussions are very strategic, but also very informative and very useful as we try to address, the biggest strategic challenge we both share.
Chris, I would agree with that. I think the ambassador laid it out clearly. I would simply say that the discussions, look, we're not going to, the ambassador and I will not reveal some of the private discussions the two leaders had on exact specifics, but as the ambassador indicated, they had wide-ranging discussions around China. What did we think that the challenges that China were facing ahead are facing ahead on economic issues, on COVID, on how President Xi, his new government and his new powers, how all of this would play out. I think both leaders did concur that the challenges that they were facing, that China is facing, are difficult. I think both leaders acknowledged that there was a wish in both countries to steady relations with China, more predictability, and to keep the competition in peaceful lanes. And so I think what Ambassador Tomita indicated was a real harmony of views about both the risks and possibilities of China. And I think both leaders agreed that one of the most important elements of our diplomacy going forward was to ensure that each side had a completely clear understanding of the arenas and areas of engagement with China going forward. And President Biden has committed us to do exactly that.
It's great. Thanks. Certainly the challenge of our time. Maybe I'll sort of spice in a question we have from our audience, and that relates to this on the economic security front, the semiconductor issue. Widely reported in the press that the United States is in ongoing talks with Japan, with the Netherlands, about seeking alignment on export control policy with respect to semiconductors themselves, but also manufacturing equipment, software design, et cetera. Was this an issue that was discussed at the meeting? What might you be able to share on that particular issue, if I may ask? Kurt, let me start with you, if that's okay.
So, yes, Chris, as you rightly point out, this topic has been the subject of extensive expert level and government level discussions between each of these governments. I think we all acknowledge the importance of making sure that coordination is done effectively. And I think it would be fair to say that when President Biden raised the issue with Prime Minister Kishida, he indicated that he was studying it carefully and that he would be responding appropriately. And I think we are satisfied and believe that the consultations have been very productive.
Ambassador Tomita, is there anything you'd like to add on that particular subject?
Well, I think Kurt was right in saying that we are on course for a very close coordination on this issue. The only thing I would add is this is a very complicated issue, and we need to work with the industry very closely, because whatever we do in this area has to make business sense. Otherwise, the efforts will not be sustainable. So the progress, I think we are making a very careful progress, looking at both technical as well as economic side of this issue. But as Kurt said, I think we are looking forward to making progress, solid progress on these issues in the coming weeks.
Great, thank you for that. Let me turn for a moment to the sort of the national security, traditional national security agenda. As I said in my sort of opening, really what Japan has announced in December, path-breaking change that we haven't seen really in the entirety of the post-war period. And of course, President Biden, in the joint statement that was issued after the meeting, expressed strong endorsement of all this. I will say it does represent a vast agenda for Japan, right? Ranging from investments in a wide range of defense capabilities, strengthening intelligence, the defense industrial base, standing up a new cyber incident response center, for example. I'm just interested in, first, the leaders' conversation about all this, because it does include support for capabilities that Japan has not had before. But what could you share with us about priorities, particular priorities within that vast agenda for 2023? Ambassador, perhaps I could start with you on that question, if I may.
Well, first of all, the significance of the decision taken by the Prime Minister is truly of historical order. I think Prime Minister himself said in his speech at the CSIS, I think he listed 3 or 4 major turning points in our defense policy in the post-war years. Prime Minister Yoshida's decision to conclude security treaty, Prime Minister Kishida's decision to upgrade treaty, and Prime Minister Abe's the defense policy review and this review. So I think the significance of this review is very clear, as you said. I mean, in terms of defense spendings, as well as in terms of the new capabilities Japan is about to acquire. But as you know, setting out the strategy is one thing, but implementing these strategies in the practical policies are different. And that is something the ministers are concerned and discussed on the occasion of 2+2, just a few days before the summit. So the leaders, endorsed the direction set out by the ministers. But I think leaders' encouragement, support is very important, because we have many priorities we need to work on. And I can tell you, it's going to be an extremely challenging task to get all these things done.
Thank you, Ambassador. Kurt, let me turn to you on that. I am struck by the full-throated endorsement from the president, across the cabinet for this agenda with Japan. Interested in sort of what the president had to say about all this in the meeting, and then from your perspective, what do you see as particular priorities in this national security agenda that Japan has set out for the alliance? Thanks.
Well, Chris, thank you. Well, first of all, I was struck, frankly, by how passionate the president was in basically endorsing and supporting everything that the prime minister said. I mean, the prime minister is a somewhat soft-spoken, careful person, and I think President Biden really was very again, almost passionate in his commitment to supporting Japan in the next little while. I think, as you indicate, Chris, there are many things that are going to happen. Prime Minister Kishida has to go through a complex budget process. That's really more about Japan domestically, but we will seek to support that wherever we can. As you rightly point out, the 2+2 included some new innovations in command structures and in deployments between, four deployed U.S. forces in Japan that operate in and around Japan. The work on that will begin immediately. Some of this is very challenging. You have been in the engine room at the Department of Defense where some of these changes have taken place. And so it's one thing for the leaders to proclaim them. The actual implementation can be extraordinarily detailed. So I think that work will get started quickly. I will say that I believe over time, Chris, we are likely going to have to invest more people on both sides into the tasks of alliance management. And I am struck by that. I think we're going to need to do that at the Department of Defense, at State, our colleagues in Hawaii at Pacific Command, and particularly in Tokyo at the embassy. And I think the same thing is going to be true within the various responsible ministries and the like in Japan. The tasks and the level of the coordination have had such a basically jump up, just a step change, that it can no longer be managed by just a couple of people on the so-called Japan desk. We're going to need to make some of the personnel and sort of organizational commitments that will put and bring more people into the effort.
Kurt, I couldn't agree more. I think the changes that have been unveiled both in Japan and at the 2+2 sort of point to an alliance agenda that's one of integration, really in a way that hasn't been true before.
Yeah.
And that will demand new things of the United States as well. So I think that's a point that's very well taken. Maybe just turning to a slightly different subject, and that's the G7 and the Prime Minister's preparation for his leadership year. I wonder, Ambassador Tomi, to start with you, what message did the Prime Minister have for the President on his G7 agenda, and in particular on the Prime Minister's very personally strongly held views on nuclear issues? What sort of message did he bring with him, and what did he seek the President's support for in terms of the G7 agenda this year?
As I said at the outset, this visit to Washington was the last leg of his trip to Europe and North America. So I think G7, how to coordinate members' position on various issues was the main theme of his trip this time. And as far as G7 is concerned, there's still we have to go through all these preparatory process. The Sherpas, political directors are going to work on many fronts. But basically, I think there are two things that will come out of this the summit in May. The one is the G7 members' unwavering commitment to rule of law. I think that's of course includes the Ukraine, but also I think the leaders are going to address any other unilateral attempt to change the status quo that might happen anywhere else. So rule of law, I think, is one of the main theme of the meeting. The other theme will be engagement with the global South, and I think this will be reflected. G7 countries reaching out to all these global South. At the same time, the members trying to bring tangible benefits to the global South, taking leadership in tackling the various, global issues like climate change, food, energy crisis, and so on and so forth. So, rulable and engagement global South will be the two main, themes of the summit. And of course, the significance of Prime Minister choosing Hiroshima as a venue, cannot be understated. I mean, he has a very strong commitment to the cause of creating the world free from the nuclear weapons. But at the same time, his ideal is, also grounded on a realism. So I think he's looking forward to practical discussions, trying to chart out the path toward this goal while being mindful of the current the challenges, for instance, posed by Russia, for instance. So I think nuclear issue will be a very important part of the discussions in Hiroshima.
Chris, I'll just jump in a second on this. I very much like Ambassador Tomida's answer. I would simply say, just for context, we have a lot of different meetings. Obviously, the United States will be hosting APEC later this year. There's meetings in the G20. These are all important institutions. But because of, as the ambassador indicated, what's happened with Russia and some other challenges, some of these larger institutions are harder to operate in right now. And one of the benefits of the G7 is that you've got a group of like-minded states that really can combine forces on shared challenges. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're so excited to be going to Japan for the G7. And I will say, as Ambassador Tomida indicated, the Prime Minister took a careful opportunity to brief the President on his goals and objectives for the G7. And the President welcomed the program in Hiroshima. We're looking forward to that. I think it's very important. It has enormous historical resonance and significance. We accept that. We understand it. It is also the case that in addition to the issues that the Prime Minister, that Ambassador Tomida indicated the Prime Minister raised, he also said it was going to be important to remind the G7 not to flag in Ukraine. And I think that will be a continuing issue that will be pointed out. And also, he did indicate to the President, as a representative from the Indo-Pacific, he intended to make the argument, the case of the significance and the important focus of other countries in Europe and elsewhere on the dynamic region that is the Indo-Pacific. And I think that's something that we welcome. And again, as you've heard, Chris, in a number of venues, we've sought to build those links between the transatlantic and the trans-Pacific communities to focus on common challenges and to embrace common opportunities as well.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to ask you next, sort of what the discussion between the two leaders was on Ukraine, and you've sort of addressed
yes.
that. I wonder, did the President have a specific ask of Prime Minister Kishida Kurt with respect to support?
Look, Chris, I got to tell you what is changing now in the relationship. Like in the past, often it was sometimes one would have to say please, and Prime Minister Kishida has a game plan and is already engaged deeply on issues in Ukraine, and had engaged deeply with European countries about the plans ahead. And so I fully expect that at appropriate time, Japan will be rolling out specific plans to support Ukraine in a variety of ways. They are active in many of the contact group discussions about support for Ukraine, and they're just a key member. I don't think we're in an environment any longer where the United States has to ask or cajole Japan. Japan is stepping up, following its own course, and we're just grateful that that course runs so closely to ours.
Yeah, very much agree with that. The Prime Minister said in his speech, and I have been saying for some time as well, that really Japan led Asia in the response to Ukraine.
Yeah.
It helped to ensure that the response to the invasion was a global one and not simply a regional one.
And Chris, can I just say one thing on this? I'm sorry, it's been raised a couple of times. Ambassador Tamiti, I went to the speech. I was pretty tired. We hadn't had an enormous amount of sleep in the days before. But I went to the speech not only to pay respects at CSIS, but also to listen. And it is a remarkable speech. It is not touch lightly on the issues. It lays out a clear, demonstrable philosophy of what Japan proposes to do, how to work with the United States, but also the steps that Japan is going to want to take and undertake independently. I think it's one of the most visionary statements of a Japanese leader I can remember.
Yeah, it truly was a powerful speech. Ambassador Tomita, anything you'd like to say, and either with respect to the Prime Minister's speech or on this Ukraine question in particular?
Well, it's kind of surprising that this is the Prime Minister's first visit to DC. I mean, he's been in that post for more than 1 year. So apart from the leaders' meeting, I think he made the speech at the CSIS, but at the same time, he had a breakfast with the Vice President, and also he had a dinner with the group of members of Congress, senators, and congressmen and congresswomen, which was also very useful. So all in all, this is a very full-fledged program for the prime ministers, and he'll come back, and there'll be an opportunity for CSIS to host the prime minister sometime in the future. So please be patient next time.
No, certainly it was a pleasure to be able to join the speech myself at CSIS. What an event that was.
Right.
Well, we're getting to the end of our time here. I did want to give you each the opportunity to offer any sort of final thoughts. It is such a remarkable time in the relationship. Frankly, as I think back on my own time, when I first started working on this relationship in the Pentagon in the early 2010s, it would have been unimaginable to see some of the things transpire that we're now seeing today. So quite a gratifying set of events. But Kurt, any closing thoughts before we wrap up here?
So Chris, the reason I liked your questioning so much was that it reflects a reality of life. A lot of times, after a momentous set of achievements, and frankly, those achievements really, that work and the accolades are due to Japanese friends, and we're supporting and working with them, but cannot say enough positive. But there is sometimes a tendency to lag and to relax. And the reason I appreciated your questioning, it reflects a deep wisdom that you've experienced yourself, that if anything, after a successful visit, you have to pedal harder and you've got more work to do. So we came back to the office today on Monday or Tuesday with a clear to-do list, which is longer than this table. And we're going to have to follow up and take those steps and to build in all the areas that you've laid out. What I will tell you that I find quite reassuring is Japanese colleagues have made their own list, and we're matching up and figuring out what steps that we need to do independently, what can we do together. I would say that in a disharmonious world, in a world that has just extraordinary uncertainty and shocks and threats abound, the fact that powerful, long-standing friends can basically consummate a new period in our relationship in such a consequential way, it is gratifying, and it does make you feel more optimistic about an uncertain future. So I'll just leave it at that, Chris. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Ambassador Tomita, any sort of final thoughts before we close?
Well, apart from the Prime Minister, I had a visit of 5 cabinet ministers and 2 diet delegations in the past few weeks. So I feel like I've done the year's work for the first 2 weeks of this year. But I mean, seriously, I mean, I said the meeting was very consequential, but the year 2023 is going to be very consequential. And I just find it very fortunate that we have managed to build, solidify the personal relationship between the 2 leaders, which is, really needed to take on this very challenging year. So I very much look forward to working with the friends in the White House and State Department, the U.S. administration, to continue a strong partnership so that we can make this year good year for both of us.
That's great. Yeah, it is. I mean, the downside of having a long list of things to do is that it's a long list of things to do, but it speaks to the breadth and the strength of the relationship. So my congratulations to you both on wrapping up that series of business. And thanks to you both sincerely, Ambassador Tomita, Dr. Campbell, for taking the time this afternoon. I think this has been enlightening for the group online, and I very much appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing.